Consciousness was yanked back from a chaotic darkness. First, the sound. A piercing, incessant drone, like 1,000 cicadas screaming deep inside her skull. Then came the smell, the uniquely cold and sharp scent of antiseptic, aggressively colonizing her senses. Eleanor's eyelids were as heavy as lead shutters. It took all her strength to pry them open a crack. What greeted her was a pure, unadulterated white. White ceiling, white walls, white sheets. Where was she? The last fragment of memory was the two massive, blinding headlights of a truck, like a monster's eyes, tearing through the curtain of the rainy night and lunging toward her. Then came the searing pain and the crisp, desperate sound of shattering glass. "You're awake." A voice spoke beside her, low and raspy, with a weariness that felt like it had been sanded down. Ellie turned her head with great effort. It was Julian. He stood by the hospital bed, the faint light from the window outlining his lean silhouette. He was thinner, the line of his jaw sharper than she remembered, his eye sockets deeper. Those eyes, which had once held galaxies only for her, were now like two dry wells, bottomless, filled with a complex storm of emotions she couldn't comprehend. But it was him. It was her Julian to eye in an instant. All fear and confusion were washed away by a tidal wave of joy. Weren't they still in that sweltering summer, scrambling for seed funding for Aether Technologies? Hadn't they just celebrated the completion of their first demo over a bowl of ramen at some cheap noodle joint? How did they end up here? "Julian," she began, her voice so dry it felt like it might crack. Did we make it?" She wanted to ask, did we get the investment? Can we finally move out of that rental that doesn't even have AC? Julian's body stiffened, his Adam's apple bobbing. He was silent for so long that Ellie thought he hadn't heard her. Then, he squeezed a single word from deep in his throat. Yeah, that one word was as cold as a block of ice dropped onto her heart. Why was his gaze so cold, so distant? The emotions churning in there, besides exhaustion, seemed to contain a trace of something she dared not contemplate, something bordering on hatred. Just then, the door to the room was pushed open gently, and a small figure ran in. It was a little girl about 4 or 5 years old, with her hair in 2 pigtails, wearing a pretty princess dress, like a perfectly sculpted doll. She ran to the bedside, tilted her little face up, and called out in a clear, childish voice, "Mommy, you're awake." "Mommy?" Ellie's brain completely shut down. She stared at this small, unfamiliar yet somehow familiar face, lost in a vortex of confusion. She was only 22. How could she have a daughter this old? She instinctively reached for Julian's hand, wanting an explanation, an answer, a sliver of comfort. But just as her fingertips were about to touch his sleeve, Julian flinched back as if electrocuted. The movement was tiny, yet it was the sharpest of knives, stabbing precisely into Ellie's heart. That moment, the phone in Julian's pocket rang. He walked out into the hallway to answer it. He must have thought she couldn't hear. His voice was hushed, but in the dead silence of the hospital, it was painfully clear. "Yeah, she just woke up. The doctor says she needs to be observed." "I know, but it's not a good time. We can talk about the divorce papers later." Divorce. The word was like a poisoned dagger, piercing through the layers of fog and striking deep into Ellie's chaotic thoughts. In her blank world, it tore open a chasm leading to the unknown, to fear, and to an endless abyss. The word divorce ricocheted inside Ellie's skull, shattering her fragile grip on reality. Julian had already returned from the hallway. He silently adjusted the slightly messy hem of the little girl's dress, his movements gentle, but he never once looked at Ellie. The entire room felt like a vacuum, so oppressive it was hard to breathe. Just then, the door was pushed open again. This time, an impeccably dressed man walked in. He looked to be in his late 30s, wearing a tailored charcoal gray suit with a Patek Philippe watch gleaming subtly on his wrist. He exuded the confident, easygoing aura of the elite. In his hands, he held a large bouquet of champagne-colored roses. "Ellie," the man said, his voice warm and magnetic. He walked straight to her bed, his face a mask of perfectly pitched concern and heartache. "I came as soon as I landed. How are you feeling, Ellie?" An alarm bell went off in her head. It was an intimate nickname, but she could swear that in her entire life, besides her father, only Julian had ever called her that. This man before her, handsome, perfect, was a complete stranger, someone from another world. The man, oblivious to her alarm, smiled and reached out to take her hand. Like a startled rabbit, Ellie yanked her hand back under the covers, her body recoiling instinctively. She pressed herself against the headboard, her terrified gaze darting to the only familiar person in the room, Julian. Her eyes silently pleaded, "Who is he? What is going on?" The man's hand froze awkwardly in midair, the smile on his face stiffening as he stared at her in bewilderment. And Julian, from beginning to end, was a cold observer. He merely lifted his eyelids, glancing at the man with a detached air. There was no hostility, no jealousy, only the indifference of a bystander. It was as if the absurd scene unfolding before him had nothing to do with him at all. The atmosphere in the room plunged to freezing. "Oh, Vincent, you're here." An urgent voice broke the stalemate. Ellie's mother, Margaret Vance, bustled in, carrying a thermos. Her eyes lit up the moment she saw the man with the roses, her face blooming into a warm, enthusiastic smile. "You must have just gotten off the plane. Thank you so much for coming. You're always so thoughtful." Then, she saw her daughter cowering in the corner of the bed like a frightened hedgehog and Julian standing stiffly like an ice sculpture. Her expression immediately darkened. "What is wrong with you, young lady? Vincent came all this way to see you. What kind of attitude is this?" she scolded Ellie, while pulling Julian out into the hallway. She lowered her voice, but her sharp, biting tone still carried clearly into the room. Why did she have to get into an accident now? And scramble her brains? What about Vincent? Let me tell you, Julian, the divorce is happening. Don't you dare think you can take advantage of her confusion and back out of this. Ellie's heart felt like it was being sliced, piece by piece, with a dull knife. Vincent, divorce. The flood of information was overwhelming, like countless heavy stones pressing down, suffocating her. She looked at the man named Vincent, who was awkwardly arranging the flowers in a vase. She looked at her mother, who was fawning over him while her gaze raked over Julian like a blade that eye in the chaos. Ellie's hand fumbled for the phone on the bedside table. It was the latest model, sleek and minimalist, but utterly foreign to her. She unlocked it with her fingerprint. The screen lit up, the wallpaper a selfie she had never seen before. The woman in the photo wore exquisite makeup, her eyes sharp, a formulaic smile on her lips. She was dressed in a crisp power suit, with a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking an entire city behind her. It was her. And yet, it wasn't. With a trembling hand, she opened the photo gallery. Her heart sank to the bottom of her stomach. There were hundreds of photos, and the subjects were her and the man named Vincent. They were kissing under the Eiffel Tower, embracing in front of a blue-domed church in Santorini, standing shoulder to shoulder at high-end galas and forums. Their smiles perfectly matched. She opened her messaging app. The pinned contact at the top wasn't Julian, but Vincent. The chat history was filled with the sweet nothings of a passionate romance. Her conversation with Julian, however, was buried at the bottom of the list. The last message was from 2 weeks ago. Julian had sent, "Maya's parent-teacher conference is tomorrow. Do you have time?" Her reply was a single word: busy. The cold, hard reality washed over her like a bucket of ice water. Who was she? What had she become? Was the girl who once cried with happiness because Julian wrote a rose for her in code the same person as this woman who hobnobbed with corporate elites and treated her husband and daughter with such chilling indifference? A monstrous wave of fear and self-loathing engulfed her. She dropped the phone, clutched her head in her hands, and let out the first, choked, agonizing sob. After 3 days in the hospital, Ellie was discharged. During those 3 days, Vincent never came back. Her mother, Margaret, did, but she spent most of her time on the phone, discussing stock prices and meetings Ellie didn't understand. The occasional glance she threw her daughter's way was filled with impatient scrutiny. Julian drove a black Porsche Panamera she didn't recognize, taking her and their daughter, Maya, to an address she'd never seen on a map. The car's interior was spacious, filled with the scent of expensive leather and a faint, pleasant fragrance. It was so quiet you could hear each other breathe. But this extreme comfort felt more suffocating than anything she had ever known. She remembered their only mode of transport had once been a second-hand bicycle that rattled everywhere except for its bell. Julian would pedal her through the tree-lined avenues of the Stanford campus. the summer wind lifting the hem of her skirt. The bumps and laughter of those days felt a million times more real than the silent, smooth ride of this moment. The car finally stopped in front of a modern villa in the Los Altos hills, nestled among lush green trees. Massive floor-to-ceiling windows, clean geometric lines, and a lawn manicured to perfection, like a golf course. It didn't look like a home. It looked like the cover of an architectural magazine, a cold monument built of money, commemorating a success she no longer remembered. Julian opened the heavy, solid wood door with his fingerprint. A living room, as grand and cold as a palace, unfolded before her. The Italian designer sofa had sharp lines, the minimalist Scandinavian rug was bare, and the walls were adorned with contemporary art she couldn't comprehend, bold in color, but utterly devoid of warmth. Everything was expensive, exquisite, yet it felt like a meticulously staged model home, without a single trace of life. This home was Julian's creation. She could see his programmer-like precision in the spotless floors and perfectly arranged cushions. But this precision and order carried the detached air of a butler serving his employer, lacking any semblance of family warmth. This was not the home they had sketched out countless times in their cramped Palo Alto apartment. Their dream home was supposed to have a small, sun-drenched balcony filled with succulents and sunflowers, a living room with a chaotic bookshelf overflowing with tech books and marketing case studies, and maybe even a lazy cat. Maya was clearly at home here. She expertly slipped on her slippers and ran to turn on the TV for cartoons. This house was her world, but to Ellie, it felt like she was an intruder who had stumbled into the wrong place at tea dinner. The tension finally erupted. Margaret had come over as well. She directed the housekeeper to serve the last soup, and then sat down at the head of the long dining table as if it were her throne. The table was laden with a lavish meal, each dish a work of art. It was all cooked by Julian. The hands that had once typed out world-changing code now created another kind of perfection in the kitchen. However, Margaret merely stirred the chicken soup with her spoon, not even bothering to taste it before setting her utensils down. She cleared her throat and, in a tone one might use to evaluate a subordinate, addressed Ellie, though her gaze scanned over the silent, head-bowed Julian like an X-ray. A woman must rely on herself. Your career is what truly matters. After your accident, the company's stock fluctuated. So many meetings are waiting for you to lead. That is a testament to your value. She paused, her tone shifting, now laced with undisguised contempt. And look at him now, spending all his time in the kitchen and with the child. A grown man with no ambition. He's completely washed up. Eleanor, think about who you are now. How could he possibly be worthy of you? As her words fell, the dining room became deathly silent. Even the sound of Maya's cartoons seemed to have been muted. Julian's hand, which was in the middle of placing a shrimp in Maya's bowl, paused in midair. Ellie saw his knuckles turn white from the force of his grip, but the pause lasted only a second. He then nonchalantly placed the shrimp in his daughter's bowl, murmuring, "It's hot. Blow on it before you eat." It was as if he hadn't heard the soul-crushing insult. He had built a small, warm bubble for himself and his daughter, shielding them from all the malice of the outside world. But Ellie had heard it. Every word was a red-hot needle stabbing into her heart. She couldn't bear it. She couldn't bear anyone speaking about her Julian that way. The boy who had argued passionately with a professor over a technical problem in a lecture hall of hundreds. The dreamer who had written the first line of code for Aether in countless late nights fueled by coffee and instant noodles. He was brilliant. He was proud. He was her hero. How could he be trampled on like this? The intense stimulation hit her brain like an electric current. The scene before her began to twist and blur. Her mother's face, smooth from expensive skincare but distorted by her venomous words, overlapped with another face, 10 years ago, in that tiny apartment filled with instant noodle cups and tech books. The summer fan word, blowing drafts of code-covered papers around the room. The same Margaret Vance, her face beaming with a genuine, loving smile, had just come in from outside. She didn't complain about the stuffy, messy room. Instead, she handed Julian a bag of chilled watermelon. Her sweaty face lit up with the most sincere smile. "Julian, our Ellie isn't the sharpest tool in the shed, and she has a bit of a temper. Her future is all in your hands. I can tell just by looking at you, son. You have the brains to do great things." You two work hard. I'll be your backup. I'll support you. The support from back then and the contempt of now. They all in your hands from back then and the not worthy of you of now. The two completely different faces flickered and merged in Ellie's mind. A tremendous sense of absurdity and sharp pain, like two invisible hands, choked her, leaving her breathless. Enough. She shot up from her chair, its legs screeching against the marble floor. She screamed, her chest heaving violently. Margaret and Julian both stared at her, stunned, as if looking at a madwoman. She didn't spare them another glance. The two most important people in her life now felt like strangers, terrifying her. She turned and ran, frantically, toward the second-floor study. She had to escape this suffocating dining room. She had to find evidence, find answers. She had to know what had happened in those lost 10 years. She had to dig up the real, buried past from the ruins of this magnificent, cage-like home. The second-floor study was less a room in a house and more Julian's independent kingdom. But an entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf. But it wasn't filled with literature or art. Instead, it was crammed with hardcover original editions of computer science textbooks, from introduction to algorithms to deep learning, each one standing like a cold tombstone. In the center was a massive black walnut desk, on which sat 3 monitors side by side. Their screensavers were cascading streams of green code, like digital waterfalls. The air was thick with the faint, warm smell of electronics. Everything here belonged to Julian, yet there was not a single trace of Ellie. Like an intruder, she frantically searched his territory. She pulled open drawers, finding them filled with neatly organized cables, USB drives, and various electronic components. She opened cabinets, finding them stacked with tidy files, all technical documents and patent applications she couldn't understand. No old belongings, no memories, not a single thing to prove they had ever shared anything. Just as she was about to despair, she found a dusty cardboard box in an inconspicuous corner on the bottom shelf. She grabbed it like a lifeline and dragged it out. The box contained no valuables, only junk she thought had been thrown out long ago. A few of her college textbooks, with her doodles still on them. A soda cup from a movie they'd seen together that they couldn't bear to throw away, and an old external hard drive, its casing yellowed with age. The moment she saw it, Ellie's heart clenched. She recognized it. They had pooled their money from their first part-time jobs to buy it. It had seemed like a fortune at the time, with a massive capacity of 500 gigabytes. They had stored all their dreams for the future on this small device. With trembling hands, she connected the hard drive's cable to the brand new iMac on the desk. The old USB port looked out of place next to the sleek Thunderbolt port, but when she plugged it in and the drive emitted its familiar, faint hum, Ellie almost cried. On the screen, a disk icon named Aether V1.0 popped up. She clicked on the icon, and a flood of folders and files appeared. She opened a folder named unearths for photos, and pictures, arranged chronologically, began to load. As the first photo appeared, the cold study seemed to vanish. The floodgates of time burst open, pulling her back to a past that was poor but glittered with light. It was the dusk of their graduation day from Stanford. They were sitting side by the lake. Julian was sketching complex architectural diagrams on his laptop, while she gnawed on a marketing textbook. "What should we call our company?" she had asked. Julian looked up at the sky, which was painted gold by the setting sun, his eyes shining. "Let's call it Aether." "Ether? Yeah." The ancient Greek philosophers believed it was a medium that transcended our mundane world, the mystical substance that made up the heavens. Our technology will be like ether, ubiquitous, connecting everything, changing everything. In that moment, looking at his young, determined profile, Ellie thought he was Prometheus, capable of creating worlds. She kept clicking, the photos changing. It was their cramped Palo Alto apartment, the paint peeling, the space tiny. In the corner of the photo was a stack of instant noodle boxes. Julian was sitting at the computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard, the screen a dense wall of code. Ellie peeked over his shoulder, holding up a whiteboard with her first product prototype sketched on it. The caption read, "The first line of code for Aether's core algorithm is born, commemorating our great CTO and equally great CEO. August 12, 2015 night." The air that night, a mix of noodle aroma and the dryness of code, was the most comforting scent she had ever known. There were photos of them sharing a bowl of ramen to save money. Julian awkwardly using his chopsticks to move all the few slices of beef into her bowl while he slurped down the noodles. She had laughed, calling him a fool, before putting half the beef back. The taste of the ramen was long forgotten, but the memory of that tender, careful gesture was searingly hot. Finally, she came across a video file. She clicked play. The image was shaky. It was in their apartment. They were staring at the computer screen, seemingly in a video call. They were so nervous their palms were sweating. When they heard the person on the other end say, "Congratulations, a $500,000 seed round. We're in," they first froze, then erupted in a massive cheer. Ellie jumped up, hugging Julian tightly, laughing and crying at the same time. The video ended with their celebration that night. No champagne, no feast. They went to a cheap barbecue joint downstairs and ordered a table full of skewers and 2 bottles of beer. Julian's face was flushed from the alcohol. He raised his bottle and declared loudly to her, "Ellie, we're going to make it. I promise." He was full of ambition then, his eyes as bright as the stars. The video ended, the screen freezing on the moment they were hugging and laughing. The study was deathly silent, broken only by Ellie's suppressed sobs. Tears fell, big and heavy, onto the cold black walnut desk, spreading into small, dark pools. The warm memories were the sharpest of knives, slicing the cold reality to ribbons. She finally understood how solid the foundation of their love had been, how pure their dream was. But because of that, a larger, more terrifying question emerged in her mind, like a bottomless black hole, threatening to swallow her whole. How did we get from there to here? The question, how did we get from there to here, was a ghost screaming silently in the cold study. Her fingertips trembled, tears blurring her vision, but she didn't stop. She had to know the answer. She forced herself back to the hard drive, back to Aether_V 1.0, and kept searching. Soon, she found a new folder, simply named IPO. She clicked on it. Another buried memory, carried on the high-definition photos within the folder, came rushing back. It was the day Aether Technologies went public on NASDAQ. In the photos, they stood before a giant electronic screen, the company's stock ticker and soaring green numbers scrolling across it. Julian wore a custom-tailored suit he was clearly uncomfortable in, his tie slightly crooked, but his face radiated a quiet, immense pride. And Ellie, in a sharp red dress, her makeup flawless and her smile confident, was raising the small gavel to strike the bell of success. The camera flashes were like daylight, pushing them to the pinnacle of the world. They were no longer dreamers in a cramped apartment. They were tech moguls worth billions. The photos captured the glory, but not the undercurrents that came with IT.in that period. Success brought not just wealth, but an endless stream of meetings, interviews, and social obligations. Ellie was a natural on stage, navigating the worlds of capital and media with ease, telling the company's story with captivating flair. Julian, after a few awkward cocktail parties, chose to retreat behind the scenes. He would rather spend 3 days and nights in a server room than make small talk over clinking glasses. Their worlds, from that point on, began to follow 2 different trajectories. The real turning point came after their daughter, Maya, was born. There was a folder on the drive named Family. The first photo was taken outside the delivery room. Julian held the newborn Maya, wrapped in a swaddle, as carefully as if he were holding a priceless treasure. The ambition from the bell-ringing ceremony was gone from his eyes, replaced by a light so gentle it was almost reverent. For an orphan, a family built from his own blood was the ultimate dream he had chased his entire life. But after the joy came the practical dilemma. The company was in a phase of explosive growth and needed a strong leader at the helm. At the same time, Ellie's mother, Margaret, was diagnosed with a heart condition that required long-term care. Ellie remembered the night that changed their lives with painful clarity. It was after Maya's 1-month celebration, a rare evening they had to themselves. "Ellie," Julian had said, holding her, his voice a low murmur in her ear. "I've been thinking a lot. The company can't function without you. You're a natural-born CEO, the face and the brains of Aether. And me? My mission is actually complete." Elliot stared at him. "What do you mean?" "Aether's core architecture is stable. The team can handle the future iterations and maintenance, but our family can't. He looked into her eyes, his expression deadly serious. Maya needs someone with her. Mom needs someone to look after her. I don't want our daughter to grow up like I did, without a parent always there. So let me come home. Let me be the one to guard our family. Ellie had been floored. She knew what it took for a man at the peak of his career to give up the empire he had built with his own hands. It required immense courage and a profound love. She was moved to tears, holding him for a long time. Feeling like the luckiest woman in the world, she agreed. She thought it was just a rebalancing of their domestic duties, that their hearts would always be one. She was wrong. From the day Julian stepped down as CTO, a subtle shift began. When Margaret heard the news, she praised Julian for his thoughtfulness to his face. But in private, she began planting seeds of doubt in Ellie's mind. You need to think this through, she'd say. A man without a career is a tiger without its teeth. He's useless. He loves you now. He's willing to sacrifice for you. But what about in the long run? You'll be flying higher and higher, while he's at home changing diapers and cooking. Will you two even have anything to talk about? You're enabling him, turning him into a dependent. At first, Ellie would argue back, but the words were like toxic thorns. Over time, they took root in her heart. When she was Ms. Vance, commanding a boardroom, speaking fluently at international forums, when she dragged her exhausted body back to the empty villa late at night to find Julian and Maya already asleep, a copy of The Science of Infant Nutrition on his nightstand, a complex emotion she refused to admit to herself began to fester. It was a mix of guilt and pity, but mostly, it was a sense of superiority and detachment she couldn't put into words. She started to feel that he didn't understand the battles she fought in the corporate world. The grueling client dinners where she had to drink until her stomach burned to close a deal. The immense pressure she faced from the board. His world had shrunk to the temperature of his daughter, the price of groceries at the farmer's market, and a chicken soup that had been simmering for 3 hours. Her world was the fluctuating stock price, the next quarter's financial report, and the ravenous competitors circling them. The king had willingly laid down his scepter and retreated to his castle, and the queen, wearing a heavier crown, marched on to a vaster battlefield, becoming ever more successful and ever more alone. The chasm between them, without them even realizing, grew deeper and wider, deep enough to bury everything they once had. The final straw landed at an unexpected moment. With an irresistible force, his name was Vincent Beaumont, but he wasn't hired by Ellie, but was brought in by the board as the company's chief strategy officer. He arrived with a Wall Street halo and a flawless resume. His mission to help Aether Technologies transition from a tech-driven company to a commercial empire. That Vincent's arrival was like a shark in a fish tank, stirring up the company's calm waters. He brought with him cutting-edge capital strategies and a ruthless business logic. He and Ellie were, it seemed, a natural match in Ellie's world. The crack was torn open, silently. The hard drive didn't have many direct records of Vincent, but Ellie could piece together the forgotten, fatal resonance from her old work calendars, email exchanges, and a few scattered work photos. It was during an urgent acquisition negotiation. The opposing party was an old, cunning European tech firm. 2 days of talks had led to a stalemate, and the team was exhausted. In the late-night conference room, only Ellie and Vincent remained. They're using delaying tactics to wear us down, Ellie said, rubbing her aching temples. No. Vincent's gaze was sharp as a hawk's. He pointed to the other company's complex ownership structure. They're not delaying, they're hiding. Look here. Their largest silent partner is a venture fund that's in financial trouble. They need cash, urgently. They need this deal more than we do. So, tomorrow, we don't negotiate. We announce that we're pulling out. We put the pressure back on them. Ellie's mind cleared. This strategy of striking at the capital foundation was something Julian would never have thought of. Julian would think about how to integrate the technology. Vincent thought about how to choke them with capital. The next day, they won. At the celebration dinner, Vincent raised his glass to her. Ellie, we're an A-team. The phrase was a double entendre. This connection wasn't just professional. Vincent knew how to appreciate her ambition, but he also knew how to appreciate the exhaustion of being the queen. He would hand her a glass of her favorite single malt whiskey after she made a tough decision. He would make her laugh with a Wall Street M&A joke when she was stressed by the board. He saw Ellie Vance, CEO, not Julian's wife or Maya's mom. Her mother, Margaret, treated Vincent like a guest of honor. She found an excuse to invite him to their home for dinner. The memory of that meal still suffocated Ellie. At the dinner table, Margaret enthusiastically served Vincent, her words dripping with flattery. "Vincent, you're so young and accomplished. Not like the one we have at home, who has no ambition at all anymore." Vincent smiled gracefully. Mr. Caden's contributions to the family are also a great achievement. And Julian was a silent backdrop through it all. He quietly fed his daughter, quietly listened to them discuss global economics and investment trends, topics he had no entry into, his face a placid mask. But Ellie knew what turmoil of loss was churning beneath that calm surface. After dinner, Margaret said to Ellie, deliberately in front of Julian, "See, this is what a real man should be like. A career, a vision. Ellie, you can only fly higher with a man like him." After that, Ellie came home less and less. Her late nights at the office with Vincent became more frequent. Work calls that started after midnight would imperceptibly drift into personal conversations. They talked about their childhoods, their ambitions, the loneliness they couldn't share with anyone else. She became addicted to the feeling of being understood, like a desert traveler who, after a long trek, stumbles upon a shimmering mirage. The final, insurmountable line was crossed after a business trip to Zurich. They had just closed a crucial overseas funding round for Aether, a heart-pounding process. At the celebratory dinner, Ellie drank too much. Back at the hotel, Vincent walked her to her room in a haze of alcohol and the euphoria of their massive success. She looked at the handsome, powerful, and understanding man before her. The admiration and desire in his eyes were a flame that ignited the fuse within her, a fuse already worn thin by stress and loneliness. When Vincent leaned in to kiss her, she didn't resist. That night, she utterly betrayed her king. Afterward, she was consumed by guilt. In the hotel bathroom, she looked at the stranger in the mirror and felt an unprecedented wave of panic and self-disgust. But when she returned to her cold home and saw Julian meticulously vacuuming the carpet, discussing which brand of yogurt to buy for Maya the next day, a stronger emotion, annoyance and resentment, overwhelmed the guilt. She started to defend herself, to find excuses for her fault. "He doesn't understand me." That sentence became her mantra, her shield. She told herself her marriage had died long ago, on the day Julian decided to give up his career. She told herself she needed a partner who could fight alongside her, not a perfect nanny. She told herself it was Julian who had chosen to leave her world, that she had done nothing wrong. A crack, once formed, can never be repaired. It only widens with time, with every lie, every moment of coldness, every act of self-deception, until the entire world falls apart. The memories on the hard drive ended abruptly after that night in Zurich. There was no record of the arguments, the Cold Wars, or the final, devastating confrontation that followed. But Ellie didn't need it. The blanks were already filled by the pain and regret consuming her heart. She finally understood that she had been the one to hand Julian the knife that was now lodged in his heart. And what truly plunged that knife in and twisted it was everything that happened next. It was on a seemingly ordinary weekend. Ellie had just returned from a week-long international roadshow, exhausted. The moment she walked in, she saw Julian in the living room, building blocks with Maya, a picture of domestic tranquility. When he saw her, he simply looked up and said calmly, "You're back." Dinner's being kept warm in the kitchen. His calmness sent a strange shiver of panic through her. She didn't eat. Claiming she was tired, she went straight upstairs to shower. As she came out of the bathroom, ready to collapse into bed, Julian walked into the room. "Come to the study for a minute," he said, his tone flat, devoid of any emotion. "There's a project post-mortem I need you to be a part of." Ellie's heart sank. A project post-mortem? On a weekend, late at night? This was highly unusual. But looking at Julian's expressionless face, she couldn't find a reason to refuse that in the study. The triple monitor setup was glowing. On the central screen was a PowerPoint presentation she knew all too well. The title read, "Family Project, Recent Anomalous Data Analysis Report." Ellie's blood ran cold. "Sit," Julian said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. He sat in the main chair, picked up the mouse, and began his post-mortem, as if he were leading any other technical meeting that he didn't argue, didn't question, didn't scream. He was like a programmer who had reached the pinnacle of calmness, presenting his analysis. Project background. The family project was initiated 6 years ago. Core members, 2. Objective, to establish a stable, healthy long-term relationship. Initial phase operations were successful. All KPIs, such as emotional connection, communication frequency, and shared goals, met expectations. As he spoke, he clicked the mouse, and photos from their college days and early startup phase appeared on the screen. The same sweet memories Ellie had just seen on the old hard drive. Then, his tone shifted, still steady, but as cold as a scalpel. 3 years ago, the project underwent its first critical node change. Core member A, Julian Caden, withdrew from the main business line to provide logistical support. From this point on, the system began to show signs of instability. The slide changed. A complex chart appeared. The horizontal axis was time, the vertical axis various data points. The data shows that, starting 3 years ago, core member B's, Eleanor Vance, time at home metric plummeted. Communication frequency decreased monthly, while business trips and overtime metrics grew exponentially. These are all within the understandable range of business fluctuations. His finger tapped the mouse. However, 2 years ago, the system began to log unexplainable, anomalous data. On the screen, a screenshot of a credit card statement appeared. A few charges from a high-end hotel in Zurich were highlighted in a red box. This is your bill from the fundraising trip to Zurich 2 years ago. The hotel you reported to me was the Ritz-Carlton, but the credit card records show a significant room service charge at the Four Seasons on the same night. Mr. Vincent Beaumont, incidentally, was staying at the Four Seasons that night. Ellie stopped breathing. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Julian didn't look at her, continuing his report. New evidence appeared on the screen. A GPS log from her car's dashcam. It showed that over the past year, her car had been parked for extended periods in the underground garage of a luxury apartment building 17 times after 11 p.m. That apartment building was Vincent's address. Screenshots from social media. Vincent posted a photo of himself skiing in Hokkaido. Half an hour later, Ellie posted a snowscape, but her location was tagged as Tokyo. However, a photography enthusiast in the comments pointed out that the unique pine trees and ski slopes were unmistakably those of Niseko, Hokkaido. The evidence was presented, one piece after another. Not a single word of accusation, not a single curse. Only cold data, tight logic, and an irrefutable timeline. Julian, like a top-tier hacker, had breached the firewall she had built with countless lies, exposing all her shame and betrayal for the world to see. This extreme calm was more devastating than any hysterical argument. It meant he had already detached all emotion, that he was simply dealing with a failed project, analyzing a system with a fatal bug. All of Ellie's defenses crumbled. She tried to explain, to say it was clients, it was coincidence, but her voice was weak and powerless against the ironclad evidence. Finally, she gave up. Why didn't you ask me sooner? She slumped in her chair, tears streaming down her face, her voice hoarse. Julian finally stopped his presentation. He turned his head and looked at her for the first time. The eyes that once held galaxies were now a barren wasteland. Ask you? He let out a small, bitter laugh that was sadder than crying. If I had asked, would you have told me the system had a bug? No. You would have covered it up with a new lie, like fixing an insignificant flaw. For a programmer, the most painful thing isn't discovering a bug. It's discovering that the system's fundamental architecture was wrong from the very beginning. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Let's get a divorce, Ellie, he said, his voice as soft as a sigh. This project has failed. We can't go back. That night, the underlying code of their relationship, the part named trust and love, was completely and cleanly deleted. In the study. The hum of the old hard drive had long since ceased, the device now dormant. On the triple monitor display, the PowerPoint presentation, titled Family Project, Recent Anomalous Data Analysis Report, remained on its final slide. It displayed Julian's conclusion. Project failed. Termination recommended. Ellie sat slumped in the cold chair, all the strength drained from her body. For the past few hours, she had been like a drowning person greedily gulping for air, swallowing the forgotten memories. the sweet, the bitter, the glorious, and the shameful. The truth, like a giant puzzle, had finally been pieced together in her mind. She saw this stranger she had become, a foolish woman, corrupted by success and vanity, pushed along by her mother's materialism and her lover's flattery, who had ultimately shattered the most precious thing she had with her own hands. She was not the victim. She was the sole, and most cruel, perpetrator. The black tide of self-loathing and remorse completely submerged her. She covered her face, letting out choked, painful sobs, her body trembling uncontrollably. She had to do something. She had to make amends, even if there was only a 1 in a million chance. She stumbled out of the study and searched the villa for Julian. He was in the first-floor nursery. Maya was asleep, and he was sitting on a small chair by the bed, under a dim night light, quietly applying a new protective film to his daughter's storybook. His profile was focused and gentle, like a secluded saint guarding his only faith. The sight pierced Ellie's heart even more deeply. "Julian." She stood at the doorway, her voice so hoarse it was barely a sound. Julian looked up. Seeing her pale face and swollen, red eyes, his expression remained unchanged. He simply asked calmly, "What is it?" "Come with me somewhere, please," she begged, like a child. "Now? Right now? I'm begging you." Julian looked at her in silence for a few seconds, his gaze so deep she felt she had nowhere to hide. Finally, he gave a slight nod. He stood up, carefully tucked his daughter in, then grabbed his jacket and followed her out. The car ride was dead silent. Ellie drove aimlessly through the city night. Eventually, guided by some deep-seated instinct, she drove to a place she thought she would never return to, their old university campus. She parked the car by the familiar lake. The summer night air, damp with the scent of grass and water, was exactly the same as it had been 10 years ago. The bench by the lake was still there, its paint now peeling and mottled. This was where they had fallen in love, where the name Aether was born, where all their dreams began. Ellie couldn't hold it together any longer. She turned to face the silent, statue-like Julian beside her. Her legs gave way, and she fell to her knees. "Julian, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," she sobbed, like a sinner confessing a mortal sin. "I was wrong. I remember everything now. I don't know how I became that person. That woman, the one who hurt you. I hate her too. I despise her. Please forgive her, can you? Forgive that stranger me. And let's start over. Let's go back to here. Back to when we first started." She was rambling, trampling on all her dignity and pride, just for a sliver of his pity. Julian listened quietly, neither interrupting nor helping her up. Only when her crying subsided into desperate whimpers did he finally speak. His voice was soft, yet it carried an unprecedented weariness and sorrow, as if all his wounds were laid bare. "Ellie, get up," he said. Ellie looked up, her face streaked with tears. The expression in his eyes was not hatred, not anger, but something deeper, a desolation like dead ashes. "Who do you love?" he asked softly. "You." "I love you. It's always been you," she answered frantically. "No." Julian shook his head, his gaze fixed on the dark lake in the distance. "You love the boy at Stanford who was willing to write you love letters in code. You love the poor kid in the cramped apartment who ate instant noodles with you but swore to build you an empire. You love the Julian who dreamed with you." He paused, then turned back to her, his gaze a knife that was both gentle and cruel, flaying her soul. "But that boy, that Julian, he was killed by you 3 years ago, on the night you flew to Zurich with Vincent Beaumont. All these years, I've been guarding this home, guarding Maya, watching you fly higher and further away. I waited for you. I told myself you were just tired, that one day you would come back. It wasn't until I found the evidence that I understood. I wasn't waiting for a wife who was late coming home. I was waiting for someone who was never going to show up. I cannot forgive you for the mistakes you're making now on behalf of a dead man. Because wounds can heal, but the dead can't come back to life." He stated it all calmly, as if narrating a fact that had nothing to do with him. Ellie knelt on the ground, completely frozen. She finally understood. Some things, once broken, can never be put back together. She hadn't just killed his love, she had killed the vibrant, living Julian who had once believed in love. The wind blew across the lake, passing between them, carrying a bone-deep chill. Yesterday was truly gone, never to return. The finality of his words by the lake was a blade that severed the last thread of delusion in Ellie's mind. She didn't cry anymore, didn't beg. Julian's words had brutally shaken her awake from a nightmare of self-deception. The dead can't come back to life. She finally understood that what she needed to save was not this dead marriage, but her own soul, lost in a maze of success and betrayal. When she went back to the hospital for a follow-up, her doctor presented a new option. Ms. Vance, based on your latest brain scans, the doctor said, pointing to a tiny shadow on the CT image, we believe your retrograde amnesia was caused by a small blood clot from the accident's intracranial hemorrhage. It's pressing on your hippocampus, the brain's memory center. He paused. There's an option. We can perform a minimally invasive surgery to remove the clot. The success rate is very high, and if it goes well, there's a good chance your memory will be restored. Of course, any surgery carries risks. There's a possibility that your memory won't return or that it could cause other neurological damage. The news was a stone dropped into still water, creating violent ripples. The first to object, vehemently, was her mother. No, absolutely not. Margaret rejected the idea without a second thought, pulling the doctor aside. Doctor, you don't understand. Her current state is fine. Why do a surgery? What if something goes wrong? She's our only daughter. We can't take that risk. Vincent also rushed over. He held Ellie's hand, his face a mask of perfect concern. Ellie, your mother is right. Your memory isn't important. Your safety is. What's past is past. We can start over. I'll help you handle everything with the company and with Mr. Caden. Their concerns sounded noble, full of love. But Ellie could clearly read their true intentions in their flickering eyes. They didn't want her memory to return to an amnesiac. Vulnerable Ellie, ignorant of her past, was the easiest pawn for them to control. Her mother could continue to dominate her life, forcing her to completely sever ties with the stain that was Julian. Vincent could seamlessly step in as her savior, taking over her career and her personal life, ensuring he, and by extension, she, got the best possible outcome in the divorce settlement. They wanted her to live forever in the carefully constructed lie they had woven. For the first time in her life, Ellie saw the people closest to her with chilling clarity. This awakening was cold and sharp. She calmly pulled her hand from Vincent's grasp and looked up, meeting her mother's gaze with a newfound firmness. Mom, she said, her voice quiet but unyielding. This is my brain and my life. I'm having the surgery. Margaret was stunned. She never expected her usually compliant daughter to speak to her with such a tone. Are you crazy? Eleanor, do you have any idea what you're saying? I'm clearer than I've ever been. Ellie stood up and walked to the window, watching the endless stream of cars below. For the past few days, I've been living like a ghost in a story that isn't mine. I've looked at my photos, read my news articles, listened to you all tell me who I am. But none of that is me. I have to find the real me, the complete me, the good, the bad, the glorious, and the shameful. I have to take responsibility for my actions, not hide behind the ridiculous excuse of amnesia like a fool. This was the first time she had ever truly defied her mother. It wasn't teenage rebellion, but the choice of an adult who, having seen the truth, was fighting for her own dignity. Ignoring her mother's fury and Vincent's stony expression, she took out her phone and called Julian. I'm having the surgery, was all she said. There was a moment of silence on the other end. Okay, Julian's voice came through, still flat. Send me the time and place. The surgery was scheduled for 3 days later. During those 3 days, Margaret and Vincent took turns trying to persuade her, using every method they could think of, but Ellie remained unshaken. The night before the surgery, Julian came. He came alone, without Maya. They sat in silence for a long time in the hospital garden. Are you scared? Julian was the first to speak. Yes, Ellie answered honestly. I'm scared of what I'll remember, that I won't be able to bear it. And I'm scared that I'll never remember it all. She turned her head, looking at Julian's long shadow cast by the lamplight. Julian, she said softly, if I get my memory back, the first thing I'll do is sign those divorce papers you prepared. And if I don't, I'll do the same. No matter who I am, it's time to pay back what I owe you. And she took a deep breath, as if making a momentous decision. Thank you for not lying to me when I was at my most confused. Thank you for letting me see the real, wounded you. You're the one who made me realize I had to wake up." Julian was silent for a long time. Just when Ellie thought he wouldn't respond, he stood up. "Get some rest. I'll be waiting outside for you tomorrow." He turned and left without looking back. That night, Ellie slept more soundly than she had in a long time. She knew that whatever fate awaited her after the operating room lights came on, she had to walk this path alone. This was her judgment and her salvation. The anesthesia wore off like a receding tide, slowly pulling away from Ellie's body. The first moment of returning consciousness was not pain, but a chaotic white light. Then, countless sounds and images, like shattered glass, exploded into billions of sharp fragments, roaring and tumbling, violently flooding her brain. "Ellie, we're an A-team." Vincent, raising his glass at the celebration dinner, his eyes burning. "Look at him now. How could he possibly be worthy of you?" Her mother, Margaret, sneering at the dinner table, her face full of contempt. "Busy." Her own one-word, ice-cold reply in the chat window to her husband's request about their daughter's parent-teacher conference. The hotel room in Zurich, the glittering city lights outside the window. She didn't push Vincent's kiss away, sinking into a stupor of alcohol and vanity. The mirror, reflecting a woman with perfect makeup and strange eyes. It was her. She felt a surge of panic, but when she got home and saw Julian reading a story to Maya, the panic turned to irritation. "He doesn't understand me." The thought, a mantra, circling in her head, draping all her betrayals and shame in a cloak of justification. The study. Julian, presenting the PowerPoint of her affair's irrefutable evidence, his voice as calm as if he were reading an obituary. "Let's get a divorce, Ellie. This project has failed." The forgotten sins she had committed with her own hands, the pain she had inflicted on Julian, which she had deliberately ignored, the lies she had woven to numb herself. Everything was no longer a blurry story seen through frosted glass. It was now her own, visceral pain. Every struggle, every shameful moment, every pang of guilt and self-justification replayed in her mind with the most brutal, unforgiving clarity. The flood of memory finally receded. What was left was not a blank slate, but a completely devastated ruin. She was no longer the naive graduate who believed love could conquer all, nor was she the panicked amnesiac grasping for a lifeline. She was finally, completely, herself again, the Eleanor Vance who had destroyed her own happiness. Slowly, she opened her heavy eyelids. The smell of antiseptic was the same. The hospital room was the same. The sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting mottled shadows on the white sheets. She moved her eyes and saw the person sitting in the chair by her bed was Julian. He looked like he had been there all night. There was a dark stubble on his chin, his eyes were bloodshot, and he looked utterly exhausted. He seemed to sense her movement and looked up, his gaze meeting hers. In that moment, time stood still. Ellie looked at him, at the man she had hurt more than anyone. His eyes were like dry wells, no longer holding the gentle, starlit glow she once knew. There was only endless fatigue and a desolate wasteland. She opened her mouth, but found she couldn't say a word. The words, "I'm sorry," felt so cheap and ridiculous now. The phrase, "I love you," would be another cruel insult to him. She could say nothing. Tears, without warning, slid from the corners of her eyes. This time, the tears were not for begging forgiveness, not for seeking pity, not for self-pity. They were the tears of clarity, of regret. The tears shed after finally seeing everything for yesterday that could never be reclaimed, for a love she had killed with her own hands. They were the heaviest price. She didn't mention starting over, didn't even say another word. She just looked at him, letting the silent tears soak her pillow, and Julian just looked at her. In her clear, sorrowful eyes, he understood everything. He knew the surgery was a success. The Ellie he had once loved so deeply and later hated so profoundly was finally back. It was just too late. After 2 more days of observation in the hospital, Ellie was discharged. During those 2 days, she displayed a startling calmness and efficiency. She shed no more tears, spoke no unnecessary words. Her eyes were clear and empty, like ruins after a great fire, washed clean by the rain. Her mother, Margaret, and Vincent both noticed the change. They tried to probe her about the surgery's outcome, but Ellie only responded with a polite, but distant manner that felt foreign to them, never mentioning her memory. This uncertainty made them deeply uneasy. The first thing Ellie did after being discharged was to bypass everyone, including her company's legal department, and contact the senior partner of the top law firm in the city in the firm's conference room, which overlooked the city skyline. Ellie made only 3 demands. 1. Draft a divorce agreement immediately. Point 2. She would voluntarily waive her right to any division of their marital assets. Point 3. She would transfer 70% of her personal shares in Aether Technologies, along with over 90% of her liquid assets and real estate, into a newly established, irrevocable trust fund. The sole beneficiaries were to be Julian Caden and their daughter, Maya Caden. When the seasoned lawyer, who had seen countless high-stakes divorces, heard these demands, he couldn't help but take off his gold-rimmed glasses and re-examine the young woman before him. In his 20 years of practice, he had only seen people fight tooth and nail for every penny. He had never seen someone give up everything so completely. This wasn't a divorce. It was an act of penance. "Ms. Vance, are you certain?" he asked, his tone grave. "Once this agreement is signed, it means you will go from being the controlling shareholder of Aether Technologies to an insignificant minority shareholder. You will lose control of your company and almost all of your personal wealth." "I'm certain." Ellie's voice held no trace of hesitation. "Please handle it as quickly as possible." She was handling it like an impersonal business project, calm, decisive, and devoid of emotion. This agreement was the last and most expensive line of code she would ever write for the relationship she had destroyed. It couldn't fix any bugs, couldn't roll the system back to its original version. The only thing it could do was to perform the most thorough liquidation of a completely failed project. The day after she signed the papers, she went back to the company. The employees were relieved to see Ms. Vance back at the helm, looking energetic. Vincent came to greet her, wanting to discuss future strategy, but Ellie cut him off calmly. "Vincent, you can have someone clear out my office," she said. "What do you mean?" Vincent was taken aback. "As of today, I am no longer the chairwoman of Aether." Ignoring Vincent's shocked expression, she walked straight to the elevator and went to a different floor. It was where her mother, Margaret, had her retirement office, a nominal advisory position with little real power. Margaret was on the phone. Seeing Ellie walk in, she beamed and quickly ended her call. "Darling, you've finally come to your senses. This is how it should be, putting all your energy into the company. You and Vincent, you're a power couple." "Mom," Ellie interrupted her, her voice calm. "Julian and I have signed the divorce papers." "You did? That's wonderful." Margaret clapped her hands in excitement. "I knew it. That man was never good enough for you. How much did you give him? You can't let him off easy." Ellie pulled out a chair and sat down, quietly looking at her mother, the woman who had shaped her values for the first half of her life. "I gave him and Maya 70% of the company's stock and all the money from our home." The smile on Margaret's face froze, like a cheap wax figure. What did you say?" "Say that again." "Are you insane?" "I'm not insane," Ellie said, her gaze like a mirror, reflecting all the greed and shock on her mother's face. "I just don't want to be wrong anymore. Mom, ever since I was little, you told me to win, to be at the top, to marry a powerful man who was worthy of me. I did it. I became a queen of the business world. I found an elite from Wall Street. The son-in-law you wanted, the one who was worthy of me, you got him." She paused, a bottomless sorrow in her voice. "But in doing so, I lost everything. I lost the man who was willing to build a world for me when I had nothing. I lost my home. I lost myself. Now, the game is over. I have to pay the price for my mistakes." She stood up and took one last look at her mother. "From today on, I want to live for myself for once." With that, she turned and left, leaving Margaret slumped in the expensive leather chair, her face ashen. Outside the window was the business empire she and Julian had built together, and now, none of it had anything to do with her anymore. 1 month later, the dust had settled in the VIP lounge of the international airport. Julian was reading a pop-up storybook with Maya. The little girl giggled at the castles and dinosaurs that sprang from the pages, her clear laughter echoing in the quiet space. Julian's face wore a long-lost, genuine ease. The fortune, enough to provide for him and his daughter for the rest of their lives, was safely tucked away in an overseas trust fund. He had sold the cold villa and dismissed all the housekeepers. He had booked 2 one-way tickets to New Zealand for himself and Maya. They were going to a place where no one knew them, a place with vast green pastures and pure, starry skies, to start a new, quiet life. The boarding announcement echoed through the lounge. Julian closed the storybook and took his daughter's small hand. "Time to go, Maya." "Daddy, are we going to find Mommy?" Maya asked innocently, looking up at him that Julian's heart still felt a slight pang. He knelt down, meeting his daughter's eyes. "No, sweetie," he said gently. "Daddy is taking you to a beautiful new home. There are lots and lots of little lambs there, and a big blue ocean." He was finally leaving the ruins of his emotional life behind. He was leaving everything from his past, including the name he had once loved so deeply, on this land. As he carried his daughter down the jet bridge and stepped into the plane, he felt an unprecedented sense of liberation. Goodbye, Ellie. Goodbye, Aether. Goodbye to the yesterday that could never be reclaimed. And Ellie remained in the city she once thought she had conquered. She did not end up with Vincent. After the divorce was finalized and the news of her losing control of the company spread, Vincent came to see her once. The admiration and passion in his eyes were gone, replaced by the cool calculation of a businessman. They had a calm conversation, like two business partners reviewing a failed venture, and then shook hands and parted ways. He soon submitted his resignation, taking his ambition and talent to find his next worthy project. Her mother, Margaret, also moved out of Ellie's apartment. She couldn't accept her daughter's stupid decision, much less the fact that her own lavish future had vanished into thin air. A wall, colder than hatred, now stood between mother and daughter. Ellie remained the nominal president of Aether Technologies. She went to work every day, attended meetings, signed documents. The employees still respectfully called her Ms. Vance, but everyone knew that the real power in the company now lay with the board and the mysterious overseas trust fund. She had the halo of Ms. Vance, but she had forever lost the man who was willing to write her love letters in binary point one evening. After the last meeting of the day, Ellie didn't go home. She took the elevator alone to the top floor of the company building. This had once been her exclusive office, the pinnacle of her power. Now, it was empty, being prepped for renovation into a communal lounge for all senior executives. She walked to the massive floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the glittering city below. The lights were coming on. The traffic flowed like rivers of light, and in countless windows, the warm glow of home flickered to life. She had once stood here, believing she owned the world. But in the end, she realized that her so-called world was just a reflection of the bustling, indifferent city outside her window. And her real world, that tiny, 30-square-meter apartment filled with the smell of instant noodles and the hum of code, had long been demolished by her own hands, never to be found again. She didn't cry. She just stood there quietly, watching the city transition from dusk to night. Her path to redemption had just begun. It would be a long, lonely road with no end in sight. But this time, she had to, and could only, walk it alone.